Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Welcome. We have Gordon Chang and Mark Goldfeder. I want to introduce you to Mark. He's a great lawyer. These are two great guests, and we'll be with them in a moment. But Donald Trump is about to do something in economics that's never been done in American history. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have people talking about tariffs like they know what they're talking about. People talking about tax cuts like they know what they're talking about, and so forth and so on. They really have no idea what they're talking about. I'd like you to listen to me very, very carefully. Donald Trump is trying to do all of the following at the same time, simultaneously. He wants to slash income and business taxes, slash federal individual income taxes, federal corporate income taxes, other taxes, not for billionaires, for all Americans. He wants to slash, and is, regulations. He wants to slash government spending. We've never seen anything like Doge and Elon Musk and those folks in our lives. He wants to slash the size of government, trying to eliminate departments and agencies and personnel. We've never seen anything like this. At the same time, he's increasing tariffs. Now, is he increasing tariffs because he likes increasing tariffs? No, he's increasing tariffs because other countries have been increasing tariffs against us without any response, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. Now, why is this so important? Well, obviously, we want the economy to do well, except for the Democrats. They want it to tank because they think it'll help them. But put them aside. This is the most aggressive effort at pro-American growth in American history. I want you to listen to me carefully. From the founding to 1913, we didn't have an income tax. We had a short temporary one during the Civil War. It was ruled unconstitutional because it was. But from our founding up to 1913, 95% of the federal government was funded by tariffs at a rate of approximately 20% on average. Now follow me. We had two major industrial revolutions during this time. From 1750 to 1850, there was no income tax, only tariffs. The second big industrial revolution was from 1850 to 1913. 1913, the passing of the federal income tax under the 16th Amendment. The two great industrial revolutions occurred when tariffs were funding the federal government and there was no federal income tax. What I would argue is the third great industrial revolution occurred under Ronald Reagan for 6 of his 8 years. With his massive tax cuts across the board, we hadn't seen anything like that since the second great industrial revolution. The economy grew under Reagan by almost 30% by the time he left office. It grew more than what was then West Germany. It was massive. In fact, it grew into the Clinton administration, which helped balance the budget. It started in about 1983, and it went into the mid-1990s. And despite what people say, if you look at Reagan's record on free markets, it was not stellar. In fact, the Cato Institute, Reason Magazine, these libertarians, they were very upset with him at the time. So when you hear Rand Paul, one of the 4 Republicans who voted the other day, and says, this takes us back to the 1930s, no, it doesn't. Because in the 1930s, there was massive increase in spending. There wasn't slashing of taxes. There wasn't slashing of regulations. And the Depression went on for 10 years, from 1929 to 1939, because Franklin Roosevelt was a socialist. Donald Trump is a capitalist. But there's even more than that. The Great Depression that occurred in our country, we've had really 2 Great Depressions. And the 2 Great Depressions occurred from 1873 to 1879, the first Great Depression. And the second Great Depression was from 1929 to 1939. No less a great economist than Milton Friedman, a libertarian, by the way, made the point, the Great Depression that occurred from 1929 to 39 wasn't due to tariffs. It was due to monetary policy. And he points out there was a severe monetary contraction by the Federal Reserve. So when the money should have been freed up for investment at the time when the economy is beginning to contract, he has argued that what the Federal Reserve did is they took a bad recession and they turned it into a depression by tightening money. In fact, he wrote extensively about this. He said the stock of money, the money supply, from 1929 to 33 fell by over 1/3, by over 33%. So there wasn't enough cash available for people to actually physically buy things or invest because the Federal Reserve contracted the monetary policy so much, the contracting economy collapsed. And then, of course, on top of that, you had the socialist policies of FDR. Two great professors from UCLA, economists, wrote about this too. Donald Trump is doing nothing like this. First of all, he's not in charge of monetary policy. What he's doing is something that's never been done in American history. He's looking at the size of government. He's shrinking it. He's looking at the spending of government. He's trying to shrink it. He's looking at the regulations. He's trying to shrink them. He's looking at the size of government, the number of employees. He's trying to shrink it. He's looking at the taxes. He's trying to slash them. All pro-growth, all private sector oriented, all middle class oriented, all capital, R&D, consumer oriented. That's not what happened at these other times. That's a key issue. At the same time, he's using tariffs to do what? To re-industrialize America in areas that we've been de-industrialized. We can't even build ships anymore. We have to rely on other countries for so much of what we do. Now let's take a careful look at this. Capital goods, excluding automotive, took the top spot of imports in 2023, clocking in at $859.1 billion. What does that include? Electric devices, computers were the two highest types of capital goods imported. Telecommunications equipment, industrial machinery, followed in the highest values of imports. This category also includes semiconductors, food machinery, aircraft parts. Consumer goods were the second largest commodity imported by the United States. Almost $758 billion worth of goods imported. Pharmaceutical preparations were the top commodity. We can't produce our own pharmaceuticals without importing these various elements, mostly from China. Followed by products in the cell phones. Other household good category. Consumer goods also include furniture, artwork, apparel, glassware. Next on the list were industrial supplies and materials, almost $700 billion. Crude oil. Even though we're energy independent, the prior administration made us more dependent than ever, but we still use more energy than we produce today. Donald Trump is trying to change that too. Again, we've never seen anything like this in American history. The pro-growth side of the Trump agenda is unmatched. It's unmatched. It's not just tax cuts. It's cutting government. It's cutting government personnel. It's cutting regulations. We have never, ever seen anything like this. Ever. This category also includes finished metal and plastic products and so forth. So Donald Trump's looking around and he's saying, we need to re-industrialize America. We need to be able to make the products we used to make for national security reasons, for our economic health, to build our skyscrapers, to build our roads, to build our economy. We can't just rely on China. Basically, we import most of what we import. Number one, Mexico. Number two, Canada. China's right up there. Number three, right on their tails, Japan and so forth. And he looks at this, he says, they're ripping us off. Not only won't they take our goods, in the case of China, they're stealing our goods. They're stealing our technology. They're stealing our proprietary information. Companies go in there and they immediately say, okay, we own 51% of your business. You're going to make available to us all your data. You're going to make available to us all your proprietary information, all your patents. It's like, excuse me? And on top of that, when we're done, we're putting you out of business. Trump says, that's enough of that. Japan. Most of our electronics are not made in the United States. The same thing happened with Reagan. What Reagan did is he put import quotas on. What Trump is doing, he's putting tariffs on. That's enough of that. Who makes televisions in America anymore? Who makes computers in America anymore? There may be a few assembly lines, not much. And of course, we know the issue about computer chips. We were the number one in the world. Now we're nowhere. And so they're trying to figure out how to do it. We can't build ships anymore. Theodore Roosevelt's Navy can't be built today. Our Navy is way behind in terms of the number of ships of the communist Chinese. He's looking at that. He's saying that is a huge problem. You know what else he's looking at? Donald Trump is looking at the whole world. He's seeing that the communist Chinese and the Russians, they're in choke points. The South China Sea, he sees it. He's talking about Greenland because he sees Russia has 10 military bases in the Arctic Circle. He sees what they're doing. He sees that communist China has contracts on both ends of the Panama Canal, that they're making it difficult for the United States, should they blackmail us militarily, to function, to push back, to have the kind of economy that we need, the kind of trade that we need. He's not anti-trade, he's for trade. He's not anti-market capitalism, he's for market capitalism. He's for free markets. But he's saying, we don't have a free world market. We're getting screwed. That's what he's saying. So now we're going to have a trade war, people say. Well, we might. And his answer to that is, all they have to do is reduce their tariffs. It's called reciprocity, and we'll reduce ours. But if they don't, doesn't that prove the point? That they want to destroy our industries? And he says they are destroying our industries. Slowly but surely and more quickly than normal, we're being hollowed out. I've looked at the history of these industrial revolutions. I've looked at the history of tariffs and income taxes. Now, what's interesting about the Democrats, they don't want to cut income taxes. They have they have a problem with stuttering. It's called tax cuts for billionaires. You bring tax cuts for billionaires. No, we want to eliminate taxes on tips. Tax cuts for billionaires. No, we want to eliminate taxes on Social Security. Tax cuts for billionaires. It's like they have an issue there, and they need help. But you look at China. China has tariffs overall in the United States of 67%, in addition to stealing all our stuff. What does Trump say? He says, all right, we're going to put a tariff in there of 34% on top of the 20 we already have. He takes a look at other countries. He's looking at the European Union, our friends, 39%. He says, okay, we're going to put 20% on their goods. He looks at Vietnam, 90%. He says, nah, we're not doing that. 46% on that. Even when it comes to reciprocity, he's not putting, for a lot of these big countries, the same level of tariffs on them that they're putting on us. And he's saying, we can't continue this way, or the United States is going to cease to be an economic and military superpower. That is what he's saying. And I started to look at this again from a macro perspective and a historical perspective. He is doing something that's never been done. And it's actually quite exciting and invigorating. Will there be a period of difficulty? I suspect there is. But a lot of that is the layover from the Biden regime, which spend like a bunch of drunken Marxists. $2 trillion on top of the pandemic money. What's that all about? That money's still floating around. It's bloated. It's gone to this group and that group and this guy who knows this guy. It's just such a complete waste. That's not productive money. I want to talk about that. Tax cuts. Because what Donald Trump is saying is these tariffs have to be coupled with massive tax cuts. He's right. 100% right. And people will say, but that'll create deficits, tax cuts. I want to clean this up too. Do tax cuts cause inflation? No. Tax cuts do not cause inflation. Stay with me. Do tax cuts cause deficits? No. Tax cuts don't cause deficits. Wow. Well, all these so-called experts, they're like the legal experts who come on and don't know their what from a you-know-what. And these economic experts come on. They're not experts. They're mouthpieces. Milton Friedman's one of the greatest economists ever, as far as I'm concerned. He didn't like tariffs. There's no question about that. But I wonder what he would think today with the entire project that Donald Trump is putting forward, the entire economic package that he's putting forward. I think he'd probably like it a lot. I think Reagan would like it a lot, too. I know I like it a lot. Milton Friedman said, inflation is caused by an increase in the money supply. The Fed, printing too much paper. He argued that inflation is always, everywhere, a monetary phenomenon, meaning that it can only be produced by a more rapid increase in the quantity of money in circulation. So he says the Great Depression of the late 20s and early 30s was created because of too tight a monetary supply. So rather than inflate, they deflated the economy and killed it. It was a bad recession, and they turned it into a depression. And then on top of that, it was extended for years by Franklin Roosevelt and his big federal government socialist policies. Trump's not doing any of that. Friedman attributed the primary cause of inflation to government spending, which leads to an increase in the money supply. He famously stated that consumers and producers, you and me, do not create inflation, emphasizing it's a result of government action. In other words, the printing of money, printing of paper, causes more dollar bills to be floating around out there. When he said inflation is not created by consumers and producers, he's saying inflation is not created by the private sector. It is not created by you, we the people. It's created by the federal government. And because businesses and consumers create wealth and economic activity, we create the engine of growth and prosperity and wealth. We don't print money. We make money. That's the difference. They print money. We make money. And Friedman said, we don't create inflation. They do through monetary policy. Government does not make money. It prints money. And when the federal government spends and borrows money it doesn't have, and the Federal Reserve, what we call monetizes it, attaches the dollar to it. That spending and borrowing exceeds the amount of money it receives in revenue, and it does this year after year after year, now by trillions of dollars every year. The federal government is creating massive debt and massive inflation that's being monetized by the Federal Reserve. Tax cuts create economic growth and wealth and prosperity across the board. They don't discriminate for billionaires. They don't discriminate against billionaires. They don't discriminate against anybody. Tax cuts mean the private sector that creates the wealth can use more of the wealth they create for capital investment, research and development, new products, re-industrializing America, expanded workforces, higher pay to keep quality employees, and so forth. That's what Trump's trying to do. Tax cuts means more money will flow from and to those who produce things, unlike the government, which takes the money and redistributes it based on political and ideological decisions, having absolutely nothing to do with economic growth or investment or wealth creation. John Kennedy's tax cuts created wealth. Ronald Reagan's tax cuts in the 1980s created an explosion of economic growth. The deficits were created during Reagan's presidency were the result of the massive spending by the ruling class. He tried to cut. He shut the government down 6 times. The deficits created under Donald Trump, it was COVID-related, and again, the Democrats and the Republicans. And Joe Biden, the Democrats have created the most massive spending spree in world history. Trillions of dollars on top of the COVID funding. It's still being spent. And they deceivingly called it, to deceive you, the American people, the Inflation Reduction Act. And thanks to DOGE, you can see the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars that are being fraudulently spent, which the Democrats and their media keep defending. Tax cuts do not cause inflation or deficits. The federal government does. And President Trump is opening up all the spigots of economic growth while trying to reindustrialize America in a way that has never been tried before, not because he's Houdini, but because there was a period of time where we didn't have an income tax. We only had tariffs. And we had the 2 great industrial revolutions. Then we had the Reagan great industrial revolution because he slashed taxes. And he had quotas on imports from Japan and other countries too. And so this is what's taking place in our country. And I want you to understand, when they talk about tax cuts for the billionaires, they're liars. Trump's first round of tax cuts when he was president of the United States, according to the IRS data, 16 to 26% tax cut for people earning between $15,000 and $50,000. People earning between $50,000 and $100,000, about a 15 to 17% tax break. People earning $100,000 to $500,000, so their personal income tax cut between 11 and 13%. By comparison, no income group with an adjusted gross income of at least $500,000 received an average tax cut exceeding 9%. And the average tax cut for brackets starting at $1 million and the billionaires was 6%. Does that sound like a tax cut for billionaires to you? Wrote Justin Haskins of the Heartland Institute some time ago. We need these massive tax cuts, and we need them as soon as possible. And the House Republicans and Democrats got to get their act together and figure out and get it done.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.